Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. I'm Camilla Fenning. I work on energy transition at the independent climate change think tank E3G. We've had the introductions to the speakers, a really great panel. I think a number of the excellent Raisina sessions have flagged the urgent need for MDB reform and the need to de-risk and scale up finance for energy, for financing the energy transition. So that's a given. In this session, I really want to take a forward-looking, innovative, solution-focused approach to what actually we need to do. And I've got a fantastic panel to help me do that. I think we need to look around better collaboration between asset holders and the MDBs themselves, and also talk about the political will for momentum, including collaboration between countries. And it's excellent to have some Japanese colleagues on the panel here too, to explore that dimension. I just wanted to mention, in the context of scaling finance for energy transition, we should note the setting of targets at India's G20 presidency and at COP28 to triple global renewable energy capacity and double energy efficiency by 2030. This is ambitious but achievable. And just to focus minds throughout this conversation and in all of our conversations, end of 2030 is less than 2,500 days away. And if you want weekends off, that's 1,700 days. So, you know, everything that we're talking about now has to happen at speed as well as at scale. So just to set that context, let's go to our speakers. And turning first, I think you can set the context excellently, given the report that was mentioned before, the triple agenda on MDB reforms, which was commissioned by the Indian G20 presidency. Mr. Singh, I wondered if you would just talk us through, you know, how you feel there was progress during the G20 presidency on this issue, and whether that has matched expectations in terms of MDB reform, and whether there's the right amount of political will and what we need to do going forward on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think you have pretty much set the context and the framework, which I will seek to address very briefly. First and foremost, if we do believe, and most of us do, that multilateral development banks are an integral part of the overall international financial architecture. They have a critical role to play in being able to finance credibly and more transparently the needs of the evolving challenges. But as they say, Camilla, if I may use that often abused adage, you can take a horse to water, you cannot force it to drink. What is true of horses could be equally true of multilateral development banks. Why? Last year, when India had the privilege of having the presidency of the G20, it appointed an expert committee, of which I was privileged to be the co-chairman, along with Professor Larry Summers, the well-known economist and former US Treasury Secretary, to do a report on the reforming the multilateral development banks. And by the way, Camilla, multilateral development banks, offhand, you think of only World Bank and some of the other institutions. I was myself surprised to know that total multilateral development banks exceed 17. There are probably today 19 multilateral development banks. So how to make the multilateral development banks more effective in being able to address the global challenges? We gave two reports. The first one we called triple financing. Why triple? Currently, if you take all lending of the multilateral development banks, you aggregate them, in an average fiscal year, they would lend about $120 billion. So we gave a proposal, how do you triple this? Take this from $120 billion to approximately over close to $300 billion. Then, second important aspect is, apart from the size of it, how do you improve and make the banks better? Better in what ways? Are they able to harness their own balance sheet strength as credibly as they can? Have they optimized that? Have they, for instance, fixed up a loan equity ratio which is adequate in terms of having done the due diligence and being able to do that? Have they been able and have the ability, and this is where I come to addressing finally the better. Better means, can they act as a family? When each of the multilateral development banks, when added together, the final result is more than the sum of the parts. So first of all, better. Second, bolder. In what way bolder? Bolder, are you risk averse in the sense that do you want to behave like a public sector bank where you're waiting for clients to show up? Are your processes and procedures adequate enough to be able to harness more and more innovative clients? Or are you caught up in procedures and caught up in systems which are antiquated? So are you bold enough to take decisions which may be risky, but which are informed decisions on risk? Finally, bigger. Bigger that the needs today to address not only the traditional needs of society, which is to deal with poverty, shared prosperity, to add to it what the World Bank itself has admitted, a livable planet. To give you one ballpark figure, roughly all expert reports suggested that the world on an average needs close to $3 trillion a year to be able to address the needs of the climate. How does $3 trillion, how does it add up? $2 trillion, we estimated, will come from improved policies of the countries themselves, from domestic resource mobilization, in better structural reforms, in better revenue buoyancy, so changes which will improve the growth rates of all recipient countries. $1 trillion, half comes from private capital, which is $500 billion, and half will come from what I mentioned to you, that bigger, bolder, better, harnessing balance sheet. So if you add up to what has been the progress, you asked me the expectations. Well, the progress has been, it's a mixed picture. First of all, it was during India's presidency that this dominant issue, which had remained in the limbo for decades, came to the forefront. The recommendation, I'm happy to be able to confess, which we gave, was adopted by the G20, is adopted in Marrakesh, it was adopted in the New Delhi Declaration, it was adopted in the COP28, which has recently finished, it was adopted as a special summit which President Macron had done. So there is now an international consensus on the 30 critical actions which you have recommended, which is necessary. How do I view the action? Action has been tardy. Political will has been elusive. That's why you ask the question of political will. That is the most important factor. Because if you take a decision, and the decision is an informed decision, it only requires tenacity. The political will is missing in its tenacity and is unevenly divided in the globe as a whole. And therefore, progress, we track down each month the tracker on each of the 30 recommendations. Has it been adequate in terms of improving your own balance sheet? To give you an example, Camille, and I'll end with that. We have a distinguished panel with us. For instance, on an average, from the time of a conception of a project to the first dollar which shows up is 24 months. You get tired. We have recommended, can the 24 months be broken down to at least 12 months? You have it. That's a long way to go still in being able to cut down the time from 24 months. Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank, is very conscious of this and is taking decisions to cut down. Are your processes and procedures adequate enough to be able to optimize your own balance sheet? How do you allow the multilateral family to work in tandem with each other? Can they count on each other's strength? Can they count on each other's practices? Can you improve the client satisfaction? And finally, how do you harness private sector capital? Two important factors which came to us. One is how do you deal, and my very good friend and colleague who's helped me a lot, Jayant Sinha, did some remarkable work on one important handicap, which is how do you mitigate foreign exchange risk? Exchange rate fluctuations are a reality. Are there multilateral systems which can enable you to share those risks better and to be able to get to the outcome? I think that's one important risk which needs to be addressed. The second is, can you use forms of finance more innovatively? Guarantees, for instance. Guarantees currently constitute only, in an average year, MEGA, which does the guarantee, does $5 billion. We have suggested that can it be increased 10 times to be able to provide guarantees, which can therefore harness your balance sheet more creative, blended finance, cascade principle, innovative mechanisms to be able to harness and mitigate private risks, including using the strength of the multilateral development banks, their convening power, to be able to have a regulatory framework which is more reliable, can invest the private sector with confidence in which their important risks have been sufficiently hedged. It's a long way to go, but progress has been very credible. We need to watch the space. We need to keep the pressure on to be able to generate the political will and to be able to generate a degree of international awareness, because climate finance is inextricably linked with the challenges which the multilateral development banks are harnessing. Thank you, Camelia.
Thank you very much. And I think the bigger, bolder, better hashtag is one that we should all use in this context. Talking about political will, I mean, I think maybe now I would turn to Mr. Jayant Singh and ask him to sort of talk through that aspect. I mean, you yourself have seen opportunities for a much faster transition to net zero for India, I think proposing a 2050 timeline. Could you explain your thinking a bit on India's faster transition and how MDBs and IFIs can support that and the various elements that might form part of that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla, and it's a real honor to be on this very distinguished panel and to follow the wonderful summary that Sri N.K. Singh has given of his brilliant report. And those of us that have read the report felt that the start of the report really captured it, because the report starts with the world is on fire. And we are living in an age of polycrisis, as we all know. But climate change is probably the most difficult, most intractable crisis that we are dealing with right now. So let me just build on what Sri N.K. Singh has so eloquently articulated and talk about how to think about it, let's say, from the Indian perspective. Taking some of the numbers that he quoted, essentially for us to be on a net zero 2070 decarbonization trajectory, which is the target the Honorable Prime Minister has set for us, India's private sector investments in decarbonization have to increase by $50 to $100 billion a year. That effectively means we have to double private sector investment in India to be on a decarbonization trajectory in renewables, in electric transportation, in green steel, in green real estate. If you look at all of these sectors, the vast majority of which require private sector investment, effectively we have to double private sector investment in India. That's the lift. That's the challenge in front of us. Now, much of India's investments, private sector investments, are actually financed by the global north, because we are a capital deficient country, as most of the global south is. So unless we get capital flowing in from the global north to help the private sector make those investments, we are not going to be able to move forward on our decarbonization trajectory. And here the real lever, the most important lever to drive the green transformation for India, and my big headline here is net zero is net positive. Net zero is net positive for India, but for that we need $50 to $100 billion a year of global north capital, and we need it at a far lower cost of capital. So right now, if you're looking at equity capital, particularly for more early stage or more speculative investments, any private equity or venture capital firm will tell you, I want an equity IRR of 20% plus, 15 to 20% in dollar terms. Now with that hurdle rate, it chokes off a lot of green investing. So we've got to drive down the cost of capital. And for that, we need blended finance instruments, just as Sri N.K. Singh ji said. We need to bring down the cost of hedging, that is foreign exchange cost that we pay for dollars because our revenue streams are in rupees, our financing is in dollars. We obviously hedge that, and that costs us a tremendous amount of money. Then we need more money to go into venture capital and private equity funds so that they can in fact power the green transformation that's required. We need a lower cost of debt. We could finance a lot more solar panels if the cost of debt was lower. And we need, finally, and I'll conclude with this, much lower climate risk insurance. We just had a dam in Sikkim, Teesta 3, swept away in a glacial melting episode, 15,000 crores, almost $2 billion swept away. It set back the development of Sikkim by 10 years probably because this hydropower dam was swept away in a glacial melting episode. So unless we can get climate risk insurance at affordable rates, none of this is possible. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. So a lot of clear needs set out there and a lot of figures behind those needs. So we have sort of two experts now on more the sort of private sector side. I'd like to turn first to Yamamoto-san to talk about who's from the CEO of Unison Capital Management. I wondered if you can talk through, how the private sector is looking at this and how the MDBs can be used to leverage private capital and how you respond to those needs articulated by the speakers already, particularly from a Japanese perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Camera. And thank you all for having me to have this opportunity to speak up. First of all, in Japan, I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic about private sector investment coming from Japan to India. Why? Because we have Maeda-san, JBIC, we have JICA, a long history of very, very, very patient capital coming in from Japan to India. Now is the time for the private sector to follow that lead. And thank God, Japan is getting out from the deflationary period. My friends, deflation is a killer. It kills your animal spirit. But now we are out of that, so private sector got to do something new. And that new thing, abundant of new things in this great nation. So that's why I'm very optimistic about in the Japan side. Now, blended finance, the role of how to increase dramatically the capital flow from north to south. That's a different level of question. So this morning I had a pleasure of sitting down with my Papua New Guinea colleague to talk about de-securitizing, de-risking development panel. Her story was very, very eloquent about the urgent needs for the daily things, healthcare, climate change action, education, all those things. I said, Madam, Japan has the largest public pension fund. It is called the GPIF, Government Pension Investment Fund. Guess how many, the AUM they have, asset they have, 1.8 trillion USD. But Camilla, take a wild guess, right? How many, what percentage of that 1.8 trillion USD allocated here?
Very little.
Yeah, it's zero. It's 0%, 0%. So that was a kind of a discussion that I had with my Papua New Guinea colleague. And it's not because they are not understanding their narrative in this region. Far from it. My colleague at GPIF knows it. But ironically, they have their own mandate, they have their own approach, and they have their own governance. And their mandate, ladies and gentlemen, is to protect your pension. So something goes south, something goes wrong, then we are going to lose our pension. That's why they are very, very, very careful about the asset allocation. So their asset allocation skewed to the north, very much so. So my point is, my final point is, I think we should invite many more asset owners to Raisina, so that they can hear you, then we can start talking about the new paradigm. If the world is on fire, then what is this risk-adjusted return? In that case, we should work together. How? MDB will play the super role, because MDB has a huge database, as Excellency suggested in the excellent report, and they have a talent pool, and they have a long-standing history of collaboration. So those asset owners will trust MDBs. Then if asset owners change their behavior, it's music to our ears, because we are the private sector. Our boss is asset owners. We are the asset allocators. So if they change their mindset, then our asset allocation will change, and that is how the capital flow from north to south is going to dramatically change in the next 10 years. That's my humble opinion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and noting the action point to Raisina organisers around the guest list for next year's dialogue, so a useful point there. And thanks for your optimism about the potential that there is for India-Japan around the pension fund. So I wanted to turn to Divyata Ashia, trustee of RUSI, Royal United Services Institute, but I think speaking more today around the sort of private investment side in the energy transition space as an expert on that. From your perspective, just building on Yamamoto-san's ideas, and just what gap do you see between the sort of asset holders and the sort of MDB stakeholders? What else needs to be done urgently, and how do we get there?
Thank you, Camilla, and thank you also for having me along. I think building on Yamamoto's couple of points, I would add 3 points. Firstly, the gap that we see between the role of the MDBs and the mandates that they have, which really is around alleviation of poverty, around climate change, around improving healthcare, is very different than those of the fiduciary roles of the asset owners. And Yamamoto-san spoke to that. The role of the pension fund is protecting their unit holders' pensions, their life savings. The role of insurance companies equally is very different, making sure that they are able to generate returns such that they're going to be able to pay out their liabilities. Those are sovereign wealth funds, other large asset owners, is equally to ensure financial returns for the well-being of their countries, their nations, their citizens. And then we also, of course, have other large asset owners, the private equity funds, other large pools of capital who have their own fiduciary responsibility, many of whom are actually, interestingly, investing on behalf of the pension funds, on behalf of the sovereigns, on behalf of the insurance companies. So you see a little bit of the dynamic that we need to work to bridge. Until I think that dialogue starts to happen, I think that gap itself shall remain. Many of these companies, also publicly listed companies, where you actually have stakeholders who require important financial returns. The second point that I would make is really around the frameworks for these asset owners. Many of them, in addition to the fiduciary and the financial responsibility, also work across ESG frameworks. I think some of the SDG mandates that they need to be working and the goals that they need to be working toward. And yes, there is a great level of disparity around a lot of this. There is disparity in terms of regulatory regimes. There isn't a global standard. But more importantly, I would say, is that it's a lot about the quantity. So I think many of them report to their boards in terms of how far what they've done, how far they've come along in achieving some of these goals and working towards their frameworks. But ultimately, where does and we've heard this phrase a lot over the last couple of days, where does the global south figure in this? They might be doing a lot in their own backyards. Corporates might be making a lot of progress, but it's not necessarily addressing what I think is obviously a very global challenge, and that not in my backyard mentality leaves a lot of room for improvement, especially when we're addressing a global challenge such as this. So the quality, if you will, of how it is that they're working those frameworks needs perhaps some adjustment from an asset owner, an asset holder, an asset manager perspective. The final point, and again, as it relates to how it is that the MDBs themselves and the private sector, the public-private partnerships can perhaps strengthen, how do we improve the dialogue itself, there's much room for, if you will, to how do you bridge that gap? These are different parlances, these are different vocabularies, they're different missions in many ways that they're working toward. And to bring together some of that is ultimately the challenge in terms of understanding risk with a similar lens, understanding first loss concerns with a similar lens, and there are many different ways to take the conversation. But I imagine that sometimes it's easier to do something afresh as opposed to rework legacy frameworks. So I think bigger, better, and bolder is certainly the way to go.
Thank you very much. Well, do we do something afresh or work with what we've got? That's an interesting question. I don't know if there are going to be any questions from the audience on that, but thank you very much for that. And turning finally to Maeda-san, as a senior representative of the Japanese government, not only chairman of the board for JBIC, but also special advisor to the Japanese cabinet, and responsible for the Asia Zero Emissions Community. I think we'd just really like a kind of high-level look, if you like, in terms of Japan's ambition as a G7 member and president last year, G20 member, in terms of driving forward the energy transition, and particularly in this context of reforming the MDBs. Would really welcome your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Also, that I'm very much privileged and honored to be here as this member of the very good, very experienced panel. First of all, I'd like to look back to what I worked in Washington, D.C. in late 80s and early 90s. Then that's Bush 41 era, the George H.W. Bush administration. I worked very closely with U.S. Treasury at that time. Charles Dallara, who's now at that time as the assistant secretary, and then the vice secretary of the Treasury. And we, Japan at that time, we have the program, so-called the capital recycling programs of the $30 billion US. At that time, we are the largest co-financier with the World Bank Group. That happened. So that we, at that time, the world is much simpler. Therefore, we provided funding for that debt relieving for the country like Mexico and others of heavily indebted countries. All financing is a debt financing. That's what happened. And then in the Clinton era, that after the 1992, President Clinton would get elected the President of the United States, he appointed Mr. Wolfensohn as the President of the World Bank. And Mr. Wolfensohn very suddenly shifted the focus of the World Bank from infrastructure financing to poverty reduction, poverty alleviation. Therefore, many years, for decades, that World Bank keep away from the financing to the infrastructure. That's therefore that World Bank group that left behind for infrastructure financing. This is a early 1990s. So our co-financing program has been shut down with the World Bank. So we, for a long time, we do not have a tie with the World Bank group. That's a history. Now, right now, Camilla, you talk about Japan's initiative, which is a AZEC, Asia Zero Emission Community. Let me talk about this briefly. Last year, Japan is the president of G7. India is the president of G20. And as the president of G7, we are part of the G7 initiative, which is a JETP, Just Energy Transition Platform, which is a G7 initiative for energy transition. But my sense, This is a more cookie-cutter solution they are finding. So that's India, Vietnam, Indonesia, South Africa, Senegal. Those are targeted countries for JET-P. But the situation regarding carbon neutrality in India and Indonesia, Vietnam, they're totally different. The cookie-cutter solution will not bring the consequences. And also that more fatal mistake is that there's no financial arrangement to fill the gap of funding. That's the issue. Therefore, that's Prime Minister Kishida, as a special advisor cabinet, I'm now fully responsible for the materializing different framework, ASEC, Asia Zero Emission Community. India is yet the member of this ASEC. Members are Japan and ASEAN 10 minus Myanmar and Australia. And last December, the Prime Minister Kishida hosted the ASEC summit meeting in December in Tokyo, taking the opportunity of Japan ASEAN 50th anniversary. So all leaders of ASEAN came. And then I created some mechanism to tackle the problem country by country. First, Vietnam. Second, Indonesia. I'm a co-head of a joint task force with the leaders-appointed minister of these two countries. Pham Minh Chinh, the Vietnamese Prime Minister, appointed Wen Chi-jun, the Minister of Economy, Investment and Program. And President Jokowi appointed Coordinating Minister, Airlangga Hartarto, Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs. So I am co-head of these two on country by country. And also that we tackle the problem jointly and we're looking for a solution. So that how we can make early termination of coal-fired power plants and then bring more hydropower and also solar and wind power. But we need also that they develop the further technology, new technology, which will fill the gap like hydrogen, ammonia. So these are the mechanisms of ASEC I'm now working on. Now, Japan plus ASEAN is only regional initiative. So from the viewpoint of G7, US, Europe, this is an Asian regional issue. However, if India join this, the view from US and European Union have to change. This will be the good step from regional initiative to the global initiative. And we can represent view of Asia, not from the view of Europe and US. European economy is very stable. However, economic growth is very much flat. India is going to be very growing. And many global South countries' top agenda is economic growth. They don't want to sacrifice economic growth because of the carbon neutrality. Therefore, that this is a very challenging task. Therefore, that the solution is a blending financing. Now, the role of the World Bank Group to be a catalyst, not just only the debt financing, as we discussed. We need the full equity and investment from the good owner of capital, like a pension fund, also sovereign wealth fund. I'm fully organized with the sovereign wealth fund groups, like Mubadala of UAE and ADQ of UAE, PIF of Saudi Arabia. These guys working very closely with us on a development of hydrogen ammonia. And also Korea as well. We are partnering with Korea as well for cover that full supply chain of hydrogen ammonia. US, they have massive, the subsidies available right now because of the Inflation Reduction Act. But those products like ammonia, hydrogen, may not be deployed to the outside the United States. Therefore, we have to urge them to deploy these new development to outside the United States. However, problem is the cost, very expensive yet. Therefore, that we need to make this the cost more affordable. Therefore, that we need to have more massive financing to fill the gap.
Thank you. I suppose I would just refer to the falling costs of renewables and how we can really gather towards that global target. And for a country like India, which is doing so incredibly well on renewables, that seems to be a really sweet spot, and indeed in many other countries. So I think that seems to be a very credible way forward. You wanted to come in?
Yeah, Camille, I just wanted to say that, this discussion today is quite informative in the sense that this is what Raisina is about. It is not only educative, it is prescriptive. I want to go back to a very important suggestion which was made by Yamamoto-san and also by you. How do you harness this huge quantum of pension funds which are not looking at rates of return, but which are looking at security? We, in our report, let me assure you, debated a lot on pension funds. This is what we have offered, and that's a one line. We have offered the creation of a new innovative window where the pension funds, if they become part of that, the security is certainly guaranteed. Rates of return would be, Yamamoto-san, comparable or better than the rates of return which they are currently getting. And I very much hope that that idea of harnessing pension funds through an innovative window can be pursued within the umbrella of the multilateral development banks, which has all the guarantees. And this ties up with the last comment which you were making about the sovereign wealth funds, because in the use of sovereign wealth funds in the same innovative window can enable the harnessing of that wealth fund in more creative ways by, let us say, in terms of guarantees, by way of, for instance, blended finance. These are creative ways in which private capital can find both high rates of return and contribute very substantially to making the multilateral development banks bigger.
Thank you for that. We only have a short time for questions, so I'd like to open it to the floor. But just thinking a lot about what can happen in 2024, just wondering if there's an idea around aligning momentum around the G20 task force on climate finance mobilization under the Brazilian presidency, the current MDB push around the country platform approach, and the upcoming NDC update round. Is there a way that the task force can provide a framework that then helps transition
so Camilla,
plans?
let me just intervene very quickly because I know we are running out of time. I'm a venture capitalist by profession, and I've stumbled into this high policy world, and I find we spend a lot of time talking to each other about country platforms and multilateral fora and so on. Let's get practical. Why don't we set up a green development bank in Gift City, funded by Japan? In part, some contribution can come from India and other willing partners. And let's use this green development bank sitting in Gift City, able to mobilize dollar financing from the north to drive the green transformation in India. Let's get very practical and concrete and do these kinds of things because they will accelerate the green transformation and bring down the cost of capital.
Like to open it to the floor. Any comments on that or other suggestions? Could we have some microphones? There are a number of hands. If those, there's one here, a lady here, somebody there. We've got 6 minutes, so please just make your intervention really quick, and we'll take a couple of questions, and then I'll turn to the panel to pick up whichever ones they would like.
Thank you very much indeed. It's just a question. First of all, I would like to express gratitude to the participants of the panel. And it was really
Is your microphone, we can't hear you terribly well.
That was really interesting. Well, just to be acquainted with mechanisms, the experience and things like that. But the panel is dedicated to democratic dollars. And the question, can the planet reclaim the Bretton Woods? Will you be so kind as just to answer? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paul Cadero at the University of Toronto. I retired from the World Bank 11 years ago after a 37-year career. it is fashionable to bash the World Bank and the MDBs. But listening to the esteemed panel today, I've heard all these stories before, that we need to have guarantees, yes. We need to scale up, yes. We need to have somebody take the risk. But the MDBs are owned by the public sector. They're owned by ministries of finance, which means, is the government of Japan, the government of the United States, the government of China prepared to put in more capital? Are they prepared to put in more IDA? Because then there could be leveraging. And I haven't heard anyone say how that's going to happen. So I'd just like to invite the panel to perhaps make a political assessment of where's the money going to come from to provide the guarantees that are necessary to drag the private sector in and give them the returns that the pension owners or the hedge fund managers expect. Because that's the missing piece if you're trying to reduce risk.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll take one more question and then I'll return to the panel to answer all of these three. Thank you.
Thank you, Claude Begley from Switzerland. It seems there is a divide between the traditional financing, like pension fund, and the more risk-oriented impact programs. Probably because we have not sufficiently identified what works in terms of impact. Typically, I have launched in India a company of doing ecological disinfection, but everybody claims they are green, and they are not green. My question, should we not tie up the financing together with a certain awareness campaign, which would come from the government or the public authority, to make sure that we really select, or whoever will finance is able to really select those projects who works?
Thank you. 3 questions. We've got just under 3 minutes. Please take whichever one you would like.
Yeah.
Would you like
Can
to?
I just take one out of that, that's 60 seconds. Bretton Woods was the first one. It certainly needs to be reinvented, restructured, and recreated. But there is no substitute to multilateral cooperation. And that's why better, bolder, and bigger. To the question from the very distinguished gentleman, having spent his career in the World Bank, from where will the money come? That's the heart of the matter. The money has to come from shareholders. The money has to come, and the World Bank has a great record. In the total capitalization of $22 billion, which is the exact amount put in by in the World Bank group, they have harnessed 900 billion. That's not bad. A 7 times leveraging, it's a tremendous thing for any institution. But in sharp contrast to being able to use their own balance sheet, their ability to harness private capital has been disappointing. $1 has led to only 0.3 of against that in harnessing. So I would say that if the World Bank needs recapitalization, shareholders have to put in more money, but equally the World Bank needs to harness its ability to attract private capital, improve on the record of what it has done, to try and match what it has done in terms of being able to do so on its own balance sheet strength.
Maeda-san, briefly.
As the views of the government and shareholders, that's not likely. I think that probably the best way to use some of the gold reserve that IMF holds, that we already have some experience in working closely with IMF, and then also that we can some trust account for exclusively focus on that one subject for the green financing. The very differential is that what BlackRock is doing right now. We participated to the fund of this structural fund. We took the mezzanine piece, World Bank and also ADB and also that entity like the KfW took the first loss piece. The amount is not so big, first loss piece. We took the mezzanine and the senior portion can be suitable for appetite of the asset owner like pension fund. More the risk is mitigating because of fast source and also this mezzanine. So that's, if everything is going up to shareholders' money, is not likely because the U.S. Congress will may block, and our parliament also may block. Therefore, that is not likely.
Thank you. Did any of the other panelists want to come in on any of those questions? But literally 30 seconds each. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, the distinguished speakers have spoken about the fact that ultimately what you need is greater political will, which I think is also at the heart of this. And the political will has to, I think, with democratic processes sometimes gets in the way, especially as elections, and these are elections in a big year across the world. So that, I think, is a very large hurdle to get over. Beyond that, of course, I think that the shareholders themselves will need to step up in order to be able to fund this. The second point I would just make very quickly is ultimately commercial terms do matter, and commercial success, a sharpness of strategy, and a real execution plan around operational and technical is something that there is no compromise for. And from that perspective, the idea of bringing together and working across two large, entirely different set of stakeholders seems a bridge too far, perhaps, as distinguished Mr. Sinha has shared, the idea of a green bank, or certainly a new platform that brings together the commercial impetus combined with the technical skills and the know-hows is going to be the best way to develop a track record of excellent projects, risk mitigating, and be able to then lead to more success.
Thank you. Just one final comment,
One
and then we
final
need to
comment.
close.
McKinsey's done some very in-depth analysis of MDB balance sheets. To your question about more capital, and what they found is, which of course was I think reinforced with the work that Sri N.K. Singh's group did as well, is that you can actually sweat the balance sheet without the need for fresh capital quite dramatically by a variety of different mechanisms, but specifically callable capital. If people are willing to give hard commitments on callable capital, you can take MDB balance sheets, and it'll be more than sufficient for the next 4, 5, 10 years to really drive the global South green transformation. So it's not even a question of political will, which is, are the MDBs ready to be, exactly as Sri N.K. Singh said, bigger, bolder, and better? I don't even think you need to go back to shareholders. I think you just ask the MDBs to step up and do the job that they're being asked to do. I, for one, cannot understand why they can't even take the simple things that can be done to be more innovative and bolder and bigger.
Thank you. On that note, we'll close the panel. Thank you very much indeed to my distinguished speakers. I think it's been very illuminating and interesting, hopefully some good ideas. We may not have solved everything. We may not have brought the horse to water, but I think there are some ways that we are moving it gently towards it. Thank you so much.